shouldering. One day it happened, and I felt what they had been saying all season long, that it wasn't the paddle I was moving. The paddle was an extension of my arms attached to my shoulders, spiraling through my twisted spine into my abdominals, coursing down my thighs to my feet. Ground yourself, starting from the middle of your soles, Coach had told me on the first day of long-distance season, while the other women held the canoe stationary in the water. Anchor your paddle as your torso twists as much as possible, then pull your body towards it as you sit up straight. Before that, I wasn't sure what I'd been doing other than trying to self-diagnose the sharp pain in my left shoulder using every remedy I could think of. Heat, ice, massage, pressure point release with a lacrosse ball, foam rolling, ibuprofen, icy hot, yoga therapy. Was it bursitis, tendonitis, a torn rotator cuff? Had I strained it, maimed it, would it ever work right again? I even went to a practitioner who suggested that it was connected to the broken collarbone I experienced out of the birth canal almost 40 years later. Sometimes people say things in such a way that finally makes sense. Different muscles were fatigued after that first day of understanding, and rather than feeling like my left shoulder was on the verge of snapping off that fragile wing, worn and frail from overuse, instead, my lower back and buttocks, my legs and feet, and most importantly, my core burned. This was how I knew that paddling every day rather than the 3 that regatta season required could be possible. It became organically, I think, from that first sprinting season, those practices that began at the same evening hour but ended after sunset, my muscles acclimating to working well past my expectations of them. My daily ritual, a quiet bike ride down the path to the beach access where I chained up against the link fence, packed my slippers into my basket, and walked barefoot, paddle in hand, to the place where Coach stood waiting for us to gather. "Good morning," Coach greeted me every afternoon, beaming. He wore socks with slippers on the sand and sometimes disposable booties like the ones you put over your shoes when you're entering a hospital's germ-free zone. He'd lean to one side, standing or walking, trying to hide his light limp. Often, he'd comb his fingers through his thin hair and raise his chin with eyes still downcast, looking humble. But Coach had crossed the channel so many times, more years than many of the crew had lived. He had led the twice-winning Fodies, then quit as their leader because practicing every day interfered with their lives, but it was necessary to win. After their first, they believed they could triumph without the daily grind, and Coach had walked. "Do it your own way," I told them. "See what happens." They asked him back the following year, and first place was theirs again. Later, he would tell me about his ex-wife and how she cheated on him after 30 years of marriage, how he never married again because his children were grown. Somebody had to pay for private school and give her the ability not to work, but she got lonely. The sacrifices he made for paddling, for the canoe club, likely part of that equation. I wanted to tell him my story, how I had been cheated on too, but I just listened, old Hawaiian music strumming softly from the radio as his white pickup creaked, bouncing down the highway. He had been at the park and offered to give me a ride to the rigging in Hawaii, even though the crew was supposed to meet at the launching point. It was the day before Elahoi, the race from Hawaii to Nanakuli. 26 miles I was secretly dedicating to my deceased father, who ran about the same amount of marathons as Coach had raced the channel. They were the same in some ways, my dad and him. Every afternoon, my dad would come home from work and don his running shoes to leave for an hour, or 2, or 3, depending on his training schedule, and how close we were to the Honolulu Marathon. Afterward, he'd come home shirtless, and my mother would call him to the table to eat. Every night, she'd tell him to put on a shirt, and every night they'd go for a short walk after dinner. Then he'd sneak off to his home office and spend the rest of the night working. He ran a top-secret program he called Low Kids Are Tough with my brother and sister, but it had gone bust by the time I was old enough to participate. He was very busy, a workaholic before the term existed, and eventually he paid for my entire college education at a private school on the mainland with a personal check. When I was growing up, a lot of people would greet me with, "I saw your dad running," and I would feel jealous. It was as if that person had somehow gotten time I wanted with him, even though his was a solitary act. They saw him in a way that I didn't, more at home on the road than he seemed, well, at home. When I finally got the time I wanted with him, I was 29 and working in his office. He had cancer and needed someone to drive him to and from appointments, pick up his macrobiotic lunches, and pretend how to know how to close real estate deals. As his glorified secretary, we spent lots of times talking about business and life and family. Our last words. "You know I love you, right?" "Yeah," he said, a bit surprised. "I love you too." And then I was on a plane to spend the holidays with my in-laws, and I think we both knew he'd be gone before we'd get another chance. A few days later, he finished his final marathon. Then I was on a red-eye back via Minnesota in a Motel 6 because my flight had missed its connection. I was there when I heard he passed, the message to call home waiting for me, though I hadn't yet told anyone about the delay. And there's about half more that I can't read because I don't have enough time. But thank you very much, and thank you Hawaii Review and Anjali and everybody. Thank you.